Okay, so what I want to do is kind of bring together some of the ideas from this assignment where we were planning a landscape by blocking in value, and just add a little more structure and also make it imaginary. This is also going to prep us for understanding linear perspective. So just if there is a test in this class, right? There are. I mean, I'll just. Well, I won't write on my drawing, but there's two types of perspective. The one that we studied earlier is atmospheric perspective. That just means that air has a color. Air absorbs the light, and as distance accrues, the color gets darker and darker and darker, or lighter and lighter and lighter. So any scene that you look at, outside, inside, anything, the light is going to progress from light to dark or dark to light. So that is atmospheric perspective. Now, linear perspective means that two parallel lines, if you have two little parallel lines like that, they will seem to converge at the furthest distance you can look, or your eye level. So we're sort of in the midst of atmospheric perspective, and we're going to add some elements of linear perspective. Just a couple basic ones. And with everything, we're trying to learn things really simply and really intuitively, instead of learning them in the most complex way, right? Everything should be utilitarian. When you learn something, the only reason to learn it is so that you can use it, right? If an idea doesn't become a tool and it's too complicated, then it's not worth knowing in drawing, because drawing is active. It's an art form. So if it doesn't have an immediate application, it's just worthless. So for this kind of a drawing, so I'm going to make a little landscape where I use both atmospheric perspective and the start of linear perspective. So for the first time, I'm using my ruler. And whenever I think about linear perspective, or I want to practice it, or landscapes in general, I like to just box in onto my drawing, right? And the reason to do that is because some of the linear perspective things, is easier to think about if you can go outside of your frame, right? So this is the frame of the drawing. If you have the ability to go outside of it, then that's even better. Now, the other thing I want to do in this drawing is I want to start using thumbnails, and you guys should all do this. This is the way professionals work. It's sort of like making a quick version of your drawing before you decide to start drawing. All right. So, and in this drawing, we're making a Star Wars landscape, just because it's kind of fun. And if you watch Star Wars, the scene that I like to draw is on Tantooine. And there's a spaceport on Tantooine called Mos Eisley. And the reason I like to draw it is because it's sort of all these buildings that are made out of sand, and they do have a lot of perspective things going, but they're also so mushy that they're pretty easy to draw, right? So in these thumbnails, we're just going to establish a bunch of different choices. So first of all, for this drawing, the way that I like to do it is I like to have a lot of ground, right? So now that means if we're seeing this much ground, that's the sky, right? If we're seeing this much ground and this much sky, what the thumbnails let us do is sort of work out some logical stuff, right? So if we're seeing that much ground, that means that the camera is looking at the ground. So that means we're on a high vantage point, and we're higher than normal, and we're looking down at the ground. So that's the first thing to remember, that that any figures that we have will be looking down. Now on this, now we're going to have a perspective point, you know, kind of like here, and then we're going to have, the streets of Mos Eisley and all these rundown buildings, right? And then in the far background, we're going to have this big atmospheric dome and maybe a water condenser, right? Because that's what Tantooine is all about, is farming water, vapor farming, right? So we don't know what these look like, but we're just, you know, having ideas that they'll be circular. But here's what we do know. We know because this dome is going to go so high up in the sky that we have to be looking up at it, right? And the same with this water condenser, that we have to be looking up. So whatever you can do to emphasize that, like when you learn these little tricks, like, okay, what if we put the shading on top instead of on the bottom of this little water condenser, right? What if we have, you know, for this atmospheric dome, if we make sure all of the curves and contours and any decorations we do, even if they're not right, but we have to make sure that they're along this curve that's tilted away from us. Even if it's expressive, like whatever is here is going to be tilted away from us so that we feel that we're looking up at something, right? Now, the final element is, you know, in this little space, there could be some kind of ship right here. And we'll sort of block it in perspective, maybe just have the nose of it or adjust where it is, right? Cool. Now, okay, so here's the streets, and they don't have to be centered like that either. I think that's more interesting. So here's kind of the main street, right? And then in the foreground, because this perspective is so weird, let's find a way to draw the person that has this perspective. So they're high up on a cliff, right? And there's going to be a figure up here, and that figure is going to be looking down on this whole scene, right? So we are then drawing a figure that is supporting the view that we're trying to create in this drawing, right? So yeah, let me move my desk over a little so it doesn't shake the camera. Cool. It's still lined up. Yeah. Okay, cool. So, and now the other thing to note is that everything will be aligned. Everything will be aligned to this point. That's where we're looking. The ship in the sky, this water tower, this condenser tower, whatever that technology is. And this guy will be outside of that alignment, right? But he still has to be three-dimensional, just in the same way that we've done, everything else, right? But because his perspective is different, like his camera is different. His camera is kind of like straight on, right? So then he won't line up with everything down here, right? So see what I'm saying? Like, and let's just talk about this logically a little bit, right? So we're looking down on these buildings. We'll see these are all roofs, right? We'll see a ton of roofs right here. So if we have those little rules of thumb that we're trying to make everyone in the same world, then we think logically, if they're all in the same world, then we should look down on the top of his head, on the top of his shoulders, right? But they're in the same world, but they have different viewpoints, okay? This viewpoint is the figure's viewpoint. And there's another viewpoint where we're standing behind the figure, observing them, right? So all of that stuff. So this kind of logic work, I guess, I think is more important than perspective, right? Because you end up with just really weird perspective drawings when you just follow the rules of perspective without thinking about the position of the camera. Okay, cool. So these are So just for practice, right? You have these thumbnails, and I'm gonna recompose the scene maybe in a different way. Like, okay, what is it if the eye line is a little lower? Then we get more sky. That's cool. We can do some cool atmospheric clouds or something. And then maybe we can make a bigger ship. Like we can make like a Star Destroyer, right? So that big triangular shape just looming through the sky. Like that's pretty awesome, right? Then we have to make sure that even, Star Wars is so iconic that it's like if you kind of just draw a giant triangular thing in the sky, there's only one thing it could be. So you don't need to have that much detail. So that's why it's kind of fun. All right, so there's a Star Destroyer, and then we'll put the viewpoint in a different place and let all of the buildings of Mos Eisley go towards that viewpoint. Okay, that's looking pretty cool. And then we'll have our figure. And this is pretty nice, right? Because the figure could be like a Sith Lord, and he's standing up here, framing the picture, looking out over Mos Eisley, right? And then finally, just variations on this same thing. So that's pretty nice. These are both pretty nice, but they seem kind of simple. They seem kind of like the same to me. It just kind of depends if you want to show the dome. Like if you want that dome to be bigger, that looks more massive and dramatic. And that water vaporizing tower, that kind of looks a little better. Because really you don't have very much room in the sky to show the size of the dome or the tower because the sky is compressed. And the buildings in this scene, if you know it in Star Wars, are not really that great. So I kind of like that, putting it in the middle but still looking down, right? And then finally, you just, compose a third idea. What if, and make an outlier idea, right? Like what if it's really way down here, and then our line of sight it has to be at the horizon. It doesn't make sense if not, but our line of sight is at the horizon, but we're looking up, and then we get to see more of this Star Destroyer and how massive and spooky it is, and we get to see the vastness of this dome, making sure that we're always looking up, and we don't care that much about the town. And then the figure maybe we'll treat in this thumbnail as smaller, right? So thumbnails are, it's important for drawing, but it's important for engineering too, right? And the engineering is kind of like just running these ideas by yourself, like what do you think of this composition? What do you think of this composition? What do you think of this composition? And it's incredibly, and it's invaluable because when you're in drawing, you're in like the tunnel of the work, and you get immediately absorbed into details, and so you almost never think about composition. So part of this piece is just thinking about composition, and really before, if we're really serious about drawing a really good illustration of Mos Eisley, I would probably do like at least 20 of these compositional drawings. Right? And what you're looking for is that feeling of running out of ideas, of being like, God, I really don't know what to do. I don't know, I'm really not sure. And then you're sort of like leaving that dead end is sort of a gateway for creativity, because then it comes to you, right? Then you're like, oh, wait a minute, what if he's on a speeder? I want to do that. And the ideas just keep flowing, right? But what this does is it lets you go through like rehearse compositions for 15 drawings or 20 drawings before you even start, and it's wonderful. Cool. So that is a great strategy. So in this drawing, have those three thumbnails on the side, and these seem like nothing, but this is kind of the most important part of the process, right? Because I learned that this composition, for whatever reason, is a little more dramatic. So I'm starting with, I'm going to do the same things, and I'm going to use the ruler really minimally. I'll just lay in my horizon, and I decided I want it to be kind of half and half. I decided I wanted this point here. But before we move on, in the thumbnails, the block in the value in the thumbnails, right? So I'm going to do that with ink because it's just more easy, more readable for me. And basically, we're going to do that same exercise in miniature of, okay, so here's my... So this is going to be my mid-tones. Okay, so these are mid, right? And then I'll add some water. In the sky, as we know, is always, if there's a picture that includes the sky is the brightest thing in every picture. Right? So this is going to be light tones. Light tones and maybe go to white only there. And then finally, this guy, because we haven't really looked at anatomy yet, but this guy is going to be just totally black, right? Just as a way of separating him out. So all the anatomical complexity we can kind of get away with just summarizing it. Okay, so that's my basic idea. Mos Eisley is going to be kind of dark. And then the other thing I might do is make a shadow kind of falling on one side of it. Just something like that. Cool. So now what I have here is a little thumbnail of atmospheric perspective, right? I just have a little tone guide for atmospheric perspective. And I'm gonna hybridize the way that we worked last time, which is where we laid in all the tones first and then drew out the details. I'm still gonna structure it, but I'm going to stick to these tones. Now this, of course, is gonna be similar. Here's the Sith Lord. Here's the Sith Lord, and then we're trying to think of. Let's see if we can render that light part of the sky a little better. Here's the city is going to be almost all this mid-tone, right? So the ground, we're going to leave this mid-tone. Maybe even the tower, that big condenser tower, could be the mid-tone as well. And we can't let that mid-tone get too dark. So I sort of wipe it back. And then we have a clear differentiation of if there is white in his picture, it's only going to be in the sky, right? That's the only place we're going to use white. Okay, so these things kind of look like nothing, but they mean a lot, right? It means that we sort of anything you can do to build the drawing before you draw is powerful, right? Because if you're just with a white piece of paper and then you're just supposed to put down marks on it, like you don't have boundaries, you don't have any rules, and you don't really know what's happening. So any of these little processes to kind of get your ideas working and orient you to the drawing before you draw are really powerful. That's what the thumbnail is all about. It's just like that same metaphor. Creativity needs limits, right? If you said unlimited creativity right now, and you like went out on the street to do that, you wouldn't know what to do. You'd be like dancing around or something, or I don't know what you would do, right? You have to have a boundary in order to support your creativity. So these are little structures that you work on before you even do the drawing. Now with perspective, I'm trying to be incorrect on purpose. So I might even not even use this ruler too much, because I want the most important thing to be my own intuition of the forms. But having these rough guidelines, that can be really cool too. So I just kind of make them in place, but there's something, just something kind of cringy about using the ruler completely. This is still not meant to be your perspective lesson. We have that separate. It's just meant to be, a way of showing you how to understand those basic rules of perspective and then integrate them into your drawing without directly using them. If you can indirectly use things, it's so much more powerful. It's kind of like that feeling of squinting, or when you have those dreams and you can fly, but as soon as you do it really easily, but as soon as you notice you can fly, or as soon as you tell anyone about it, you lose the ability. And the whole dream is about remembering it. That is that kind of soft concentration, right? So we just have a feeling of the forms going toward the center. That's it. And you can see I'm purposely breaking down some of the linear things that I was working on here, so I can just keep it nice and soft, right? And now, okay, so this is a street in Mos Eisley. I'll start with this one kind of, and it's going to go vaguely along this row, and I'm just making the divisions of the walls, right? Now this is maybe one unit of a house, and this is that same kind of sensitivity. See, can you take this length here, that length, push it back that distance and redraw it? It's a lot shorter than you think. It's just like when you're collapsing a square, you'll always make it too square, right? So now can you take these two lengths and push them back? And it's always err on the side of it being too small. Because your mind will try to trick you into thinking it's larger. So maybe here it sort of gets out of control. Now this is just a cubic form, right? So this is the front of the cubic form. And this is kind of the edge of it. Cool, right? So now we have this sense of these Mos Eisley houses, right? And just to have a sense that they're imperfect and they're irregular, right? So here's another form like